All right, now that you've got the basics down as far as dominant and recessive and you got some vocab, now we're going to kick things up a little bit and we're going to take a look at some things that maybe don't quite follow the rules the way that we've learned them so far. Okay, but let's go back and remind ourselves, well, what are the rules we've learned so far? What you've learned so far is what we would call complete dominance. Okay, I never used this word before, but now we are. Okay, and so that is having one thing completely and totally dominant over the other thing. Okay, there's only two options, this or that. That's it. And so one way we can see this is in sheep. Okay, having white wool is dominant to having black wool, and this is real. Okay, which is why there are so many more white sheep than black sheep. And so in this example, the homozygous dominant sheep is going to have the dominant phenotype, white. The heterozygous is going to have the dominant phenotype, white, because of that capital W there. And only the homozygous recessive is going to be black. So in sheep, you can be black or white. That's it. But this is not always the case. Oftentimes, if you think about traits, there's more than just two options. Okay. So if something only has two options, that's called complete dominance. And now we're going to learn, well, what are some other ways we can get our phenotypes? One way is called incomplete dominance. And that means instead of having two phenotypes, there are three. Okay. And the third one now comes from our heterozygote. So let's take a look at these flowers. Okay, if a flower is big R, it's red. If a flower is little r, it's white. If you take these and put them together and have babies, okay, under this way, we would expect the heterozygous to have that dominant phenotype. So we would expect all of the babies to be red. Nope, the babies are pink. What? That's right. So our heterozygous here have a third phenotype. And notice it's like a blend, it's a mix, it's an intermediate between the dominant and the recessive. Okay, so if you're ever seeing something where there's three options and one of them is like an in-betweener option, that's incomplete dominance. Okay, so one isn't totally dominant over the other, they blend and mix together. Another way we can see this is called codominance. Again, instead of only having two phenotypes, we have three. But instead of red and white making pink, red plus white equals red and white, okay? So here are the baby flowers. Notice we see both red and both white showing up fairly equally and separately. This is called codominance, co meaning with, together. So they're both there together. They don't blend like with the pink. They're both showing up on their own, but on the same flower. Okay, so here's our heterozygote here that shows both that red and white. Now you're thinking, okay, Ms. Culberson, great. So this shows us three possibilities of phenotypes, but I mean, is that it? Aren't there things that are just more than three options? Like, I don't know, what about hair color? There's more than three options of hair color. How does that work? Well, this would be what's called a polygenic trait. Okay. Instead of just one gene contributing to a trait, like big B is brown hair, little b is blonde hair. No. It's a whole bunch of genes contributing to the final phenotype. And they all contribute in kind of an incomplete dominant sort of way where they're all kind of blending together. And all of them, all the results add up to kind of the rainbow of hair colors that we can see. Okay, or eye colors, also polygenic, right? We have lots of different eye colors. We have brown, we have blue, we have hazel, we have green, right? Almost like a little gray sometimes. Like we got lots of different eye colors. And this is because it's controlled by more than one gene. Height, similarly, is controlled by more than one gene. It's not just you can be tall, short, or in the middle. There's a huge continuum, right? You can be almost any increment of heights, right? Yeah, I can be 5'0.2 inches. You can be 5'4 inches, right? We've got all these different heights controlled by lots of different genes. One more that's polygenic is going to be skin color. If you think about all the variations of skin tone you can have, that's not controlled by just one gene. It's a bunch of genes, and more on that coming up real soon. We're going to talk about skin color more in depth another day. There's another thing called epistasis. And epistasis is where one gene has an effect on the other. And so one place that you can see this is in dogs, in Labradors, okay? And so they've got two genes that control their coloring, and they're going to be shown by E's and B's. So the E is going to determine if there's any like pigment at all in their coat. So if they have a little E, there's going to be no pigment, and that means boop, you're yellow lab, because yellow is no pigment in dogs. If you're a big E, that means, oh, yep, you're going to have pigment, but the question is going to be how much and how dark, okay? So this E is going to then affect the B gene. And it might be easier to just like take a look at these pictures here. But if you have the dark pigment, then okay, that's there, great. And then now we're going to see either a chocolate or a black lab, okay? Depending on what's going on with the B genes. Little B's are going to be chocolate, big B's are going to be black lab, okay? But what about these dogs? Well, they don't have any pigment, so they're going to be little E. So no matter what, they're going to be like a golden, okay? But we've got a couple different options here. If they got the little B's, the brown is going to be around their eyes and nose. And if they got the big B, there's going to be black around their eyes and nose. But either way, there's no color showing up in their fur, okay? So the pigment gene is going to affect the color in the fur gene. These ones, we can see the color in the fur. These ones, we can't see the color in the fur, right? I don't want you to stress too much about this, but understand that sometimes there's more than one gene. Sometimes there's more than one gene, and one is going to like control or affect the other. Okay, that's all I want you to understand from that. There's also what's called sex-linked inheritance, and this means that a trait is inherited not on one of our autosomes, but it's inherited on one of the sex chromosomes, and this is almost always the X chromosome, okay? Because the Y chromosome is very little on it, and the X chromosome is pretty big. And so when we see sex-linked inheritance, this is going to be a thing that typically affects one gender more than the other, and this is going to typically be males, okay? And so let's take a look at one, color blindness, okay? The gene that can cause you to be colorblind is on the X chromosome, okay? So up here is a dad. He's not colorblind. He has a regular X, a regular Y. Over here, here's a mom. She has an X. Okay, colorblind is recessive. And so she has an X. One of her X's has the colorblind, that recessive gene on it. So she's considered a carrier because she's got one copy. Okay. But she doesn't have it because it's recessive, right? So she's heterozygous, so she's going to show the dominant, which is not being colorblind. And so if we put the kids together, we'll see like half are female, half are male. And you'll notice that, ooh, over here, this male becomes colorblind. Why? Because he got the colorblind X from his mom. And although it's recessive, he only gets one X. And so if he gets that one X that has the colorblind thing on it, boom, he's got it, even though he didn't get two copies, because he doesn't get two X's, right? As opposed to this one right here, his sister, she would have one X that's unaffected, one X that's affected. But since she's got two X's, she's not going to be colorblind, and she's just going to have normal vision. This girl's totally going to be fine. This guy's totally going to be fine. But see how it affects the males? Out of all four kids, the only kid that has a possibility of getting it would be a male, right? So this is called sex-linked inheritance. There's going to be more practice with this after the lecture, so stay tuned. But again, it's when things are on the X chromosome, typically recessive things, and so it's much easier for a male to get it because males only get one sex chromosome, so if they get it, they got it. Our last thing for the day is that in addition to all this, sometimes where you are in your environment can affect the phenotype, and I just think this is so cool. So things like, animals that live in the Arctic oftentimes have different colorations. In summer, they're like browner because the earth is all brown and there's dirt and everything. And then in the winter, when it's all covered in snow, it's white. And they can actually have the ability to change their fur color depending on the season. It'll go back and forth from white to brown with the change of the seasons. Hydrangeas, which are these kind of flowers, are really famous because of the fact that depending on the pH of the soil, where pH chemistry word is basically how acidic or not acidic soil is, will change what color it is. Okay, so the more acidic soil we have, the deeper blue we get. The less acidic soil we have is going to get purple and then way down into pink if it's more basic. Okay, just kind of interesting to hear about. That the soil that something is grown in could affect what it looks like on the outside. And then lastly, reptiles have really interesting sometimes things with how they end up being their gender. And there's lots of different examples. But one of my favorites are these little slider turtles. Okay. If the nest is in a cooler location, all of the babies born are going to be males. And if the nest is in a warmer location, they're all going to be females. What? Yeah. So depending on the temperature, it can change the gender. It's pretty complicated, but it happens. So just to make you aware of the fact that in addition to all these genetics and all these things, sometimes external factors in our environment can change and have an effect on the phenotype. Okay, so now you've got a good overview. Go back to the doc, and there's going to be a couple questions to try about color blindness and Punnett squares.